Welcome back to the program, everyone. My name is Jeff, otherwise known as the Economic Prepper, and I'm here to talk to you about two different things. I'm talking about blockchain, not necessarily the Bitcoin application of blockchain, but the blockchain technology in general, and real estate. And what do those two things have to go together, and why banks are blocking you from being able to do real estate on your own. Now, those of you that are familiar with blockchain probably associate that with Bitcoin, one and the same. They are not equal. Blockchain is the technology. Bitcoin is the first killer app of the blockchain. Blockchain is just writing down data in an orderly fashion that hopefully not no one can manipulate. Now, blockchains can be done in a lot of different ways, but the core definition of blockchains, they are blocks of data that are linked from block to block, chained together. Blockchain. That is what it is. It's a data record. Now, you can do things with a data record to make it, you could make it decentralized, you can make it immutable, which means you can't change it. You can do lots of things with that blockchain. You can monetize it, but the idea is, or you can privatize it or make it public. So there are lots of different applications of blockchain. That's considered a use case. One very clear use case that I've seen that people are starting to explore and more is real estate. Now, if you've ever bought a house or sold a house, you're familiar with all the complexities and issues, right? You got a realtor, you got an appraiser, you have a title company, you have closing companies, you have all these different people. They all want to get a piece of the action. They're all involved in the process. It could take months to close a real estate deal if you're lucky. I mean, it's probably on the average, probably a month or two. And plus, I didn't even mention the mortgages and the banks. I'll get to that in a second. So why is blockchain a good use case? Well, first off, there's a title company. What does a title company do? They check the land records, they check the deeds to make sure that the seller actually owns it and owns it free and clear so that they can sell that property. That's their job. So they bring the title to the closing and allow the buyer to get a clean title, so it's not clouded, a clean title from the seller, and then they record that. All that can be done with smart contracts and a blockchain. All can be done there. Same with a real estate contract, okay? The third vehicle that's quite often needed to do a real estate transaction is, and you can sell houses on your own. There's no question about that, but most people don't because of all the legalese, all the different things that they put, all the barriers that are out there. The biggest issue is mortgages, okay? Mortgages are one of the biggest barriers because if you write your own mortgage, right? Banks do most of this. Banks create their own mortgages. And why do they do this? Because that's how they create currency. They create dollars out of thin air. So if you want to buy a house for $500,000 and you're going to put a $400,000 mortgage on it, where's that money coming from? We got to qualify for the mortgage, and then they write a mortgage, and then the mortgage will get sold on the secondary market. The banks or the mortgage company creates that mortgage, that $400,000 mortgage, and sells it. Now, you've all seen it. If you've ever owned a house and you close with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or ABC Bank, they sell that mortgage to somebody else. So you're writing your payments every month to a different bank than you closed with. Why? Because they sold the mortgage, right? There are companies that will buy that mortgage. Now, either they will sell it onto Wall Street or they sell it into a bundle to a servicing company. But that's a business, right? And the banks, they're going to get paid. They're not going to get paid that $400,000. They get paid probably less, but it's free money to them because they didn't have to do anything but create the mortgage. They created the currency. So now someone else gets a piece of the action because they're going to service that $400,000, that payment you're making every month to make sure you continue to hold that house in good standing. The problem that the average user, how do we get away from the banks, right? That's part of the reason why we go into Bitcoin and blockchain, getting away from the banks and their control of our lives. How do you do that with a real estate transaction? You could write your own mortgage. You can do all that. There are contracts available. You can go into Staples, last I looked, and there's contracts for everything from renting to selling to leasing. It's all there. But mortgages, there's a term called a conforming mortgage. What does it conform to? What does that mean? What it means is it conforms to industry standards so that somebody else can buy it. In other words, they could be wrapped. If you've ever watched The Big Short, you see all these mortgages that get bundled into like big packages and get sold to Wall Street as this big investment for millions and millions, probably billions of dollars, because it's like got thousands of mortgages all tied together. And some of them are rated A, some of them are AAA, some of them are B rated, all different ratings. But all the underlying paperwork that determines all that conforms to some standards so it can be bundled together. Now the average, Joe Average that sells his house doesn't have access to that. He does not have the ability to get that paperwork. And he certainly doesn't have access to sell that mortgage to Wall Street, which the banks do. That's the difference. So what has to happen is you've got to get out of that loop, right? You've got to have someone willing to buy your mortgage and sell it on the secondary market if you want to get paid for your house. So if you own the house, and you're going to sell it for $500,000 and you're willing to take $100,000 down and $400,000 for a mortgage, great, right? But the $400,000, you don't have it. They don't have it. The bank does. You need the bank to create it, right? You can't create it. You don't have the ability to create the $400,000 and sell that to somebody else. Most people do not have the outlet to sell paper, what is considered mortgages, to someone else, typically Wall Street. Or you can have a private investor too. Some people like to have payments coming in. That's perfectly fine. But most people don't have that ability. So to get the banks out of the loop and be able to do it yourself, and to get everybody out of the mix and get real estate streamlined so you can do a smart contract between the buyer and the seller, and you could finance it and sell it in some marketplace, you need the marketplace. And to have the marketplace, you need to know what the rules are. So you need to have a mortgage that you can write for those rules, and then they're willing to buy it, and then they're willing to service it, or they're willing to sell it to somebody. So that is the barrier for banks and banking, that the ability of the average person to get to that secondary market. That's why a lot of people can't do a for sale by owner and close on their own unless it's a cash buyer. That's a completely different animal. Most people need a mortgage, but in order for you to write your own mortgage, you have to have somebody that's willing to take on that debt, like, okay, I'll own the first rights to your house if you don't pay, and I'll be able to foreclose. But they're willing to put up that $400,000 now because somebody in that transaction needs $400,000. So back to the original transaction, seller $500,000. You put $100,000 down. You need a $400,000 mortgage to make that seller whole. So the buyer typically gets that $400,000 mortgage to go along with their $100,000 down, so that everybody gets paid off. The bank steps in the middle and says, "We'll create, a good buyer. Sure, for a good buyer, we'll make that $400,000 mortgage because we can sell it to somebody else, and then we'll bring $400,000, put it in the escrow, put it in the account, and you'll be able to be done." You can close on that house. That's how the title company and the closing company make sure that everything gets sorted out at the closing table. That's what's missing from private transactions more often than not, unless it's a cash buyer. But if it's a mortgage is involved, that's the issue. And having conforming loans and having access to create conforming loans is why banks, for the most part, exist. Okay, that's where they make their money, creating dollars out of nothing by creating that mortgage and selling it to someone else. So what's the answer? You're going to have a secondary market for the average person that's willing to buy it. And that could wind up being a Bitcoin bank like MicroStrategy. We will have to see. But I just want to lay it out there, like why banks are stuck in the middle of real estate transactions and why this real estate market is kind of stagnant right now. Because not just because we can't meet on the prices, the mortgages cost too much and no one's willing to buy the mortgages anymore. So that's part of the problem. So a lot said today. I'm going to leave it there for now. I read every comment, and I'll see you next video. Take care.